Hello and welcome to the two-man power trip of wrestling. I am your host, JP John Paz. With me today, very special guest, former two-time AWA World Tag Team Champion, one of the killer bees, of course. He is Jumpin' Jim Brunzell. Jumpin' Jim, how you doing today, sir?
Very good, John. Thanks for having me.
What is going on in your world? What have you been up to?
Oh, geez. Well, I've been retired a couple years now, and I'm involved with my grandsons. They're both avid soccer players, and they've been to Europe, and they were, high school kids and on elite teams. So we've been following them, and then my son's involved in film. Yeah, he has a film company that it's called Sound Unseen, and he's been very interested in that for 20 some years, and he just came back from Germany, and now he's going to go to the Tribeca one, and I think and he's going to go to Toronto. So it's been good. I've been blessed. I've had a number of surgeries since I was done with wrestling. I've had both shoulders replaced, both knees replaced. I've had my hip replaced, and I've had a couple surgeries on my elbow for nerve depression. But, I'm still fairly cognitive.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, that's mandatory.
Yes. It's great to if you look at though, like beyond cognitive, because it seems like wrestling figures, like now you get more and more of them, comic books, more and more of them. So it seems like you're out there more so now maybe than before. It's just crazy how much stuff's out there now for you guys.
Well, it is, and I mean, wrestling is so hot in the 80s and 90s, and early 2000s, and now I don't know where it is because I don't like either product from the WWE or the AEW. Although I just did a podcast, John, with a fellow in Wales just the other day, Sunday.
Oh,
and his name's Stu Palmer. And he told me that right now they have a big event with the AEW on August 27th in Wembley Stadium. They've sold 87,000 tickets, and they don't even have a card yet. They don't know who's wrestling. So it's going to be huge over there.
It's absolutely huge. Isn't that crazy, though? It's like no card. They don't know. I mean, they know the wrestlers, but they don't know who's wrestling.
Yeah.
But they're just clamoring to go to an event, not even a WWE show. Just they want to go to a wrestling show.
I know it. It's amazing. And he was so excited. And, he told me he got his ticket. And I said, well, I don't know too many guys from the AEW because they were a lot younger than me. I know Chris Jericho very limited because he came out of Winnipeg. And I don't know, he's got to be 50 years old now.
52.
Is he really? Well, God bless him. If he can still work in the ring at 52. I had my last match when I was 50 years old, and I had it with Jim Neidhart in a small town in Iowa. And I thought he was going to tear my head off. So I said, that's it. I'm done.
Hey, Sting is still there too. He's 64. He's still wrestling, believe it or not.
Oh my! Well, look at Greg Valentine. He's 74. He still gets in the ring. I told him, I said, Hammer, I said, what are you doing? He said, well, he says, as long as they'll pay me.
Right? Yeah,
I know it. Jeez.
He probably, hopefully, doesn't need to wrestle, but I guess if he wants to, they'll pay him. I don't know.
I don't know. He's moved to Las Vegas. And I think he's pretty active still. He probably works once or twice a month. And, it's just too bad, and it's funny because in the last conversation I had with the Stu in Wales, we were talking about the real difference in wrestling since when I was there, which was in the late 80s and, early 90s. And although I started in the 70s, and what's happened now, you have guys on contract with the WWE. They're making $4 and $5 million a year. No. And not working that much. When Brian Blair and I were there in, it was 85, 86, 87, 88, we wrestled. This is unbelievable. We averaged for 3.5 years, 27 days a month. on the road.
Whoa, it's too much. That's
Yeah,
crazy.
we went 52 days in a row. That was our
Wow.
longest. And there was, the late Khosrow Vaziri, the Iron Sheik. He went 93 days in a row.
God.
And that's the way Vince
Much.
was. He had 60 guys, and he thought, well, I'm just going to keep them busy, and that's what he did. I mean, it was 3 towns running a night, and hopefully you were on either Hulk Hogan's card or Paul Orndorff or somebody that was going to draw money. And at that time, in the 80s, middle 80s, almost everything that Vince threw on the wall drew money. So, it was good for everybody. But it still bothers me that professional wrestling, and I have no idea where they're at now in terms of the AEW or the WWE in terms of providing for their talent. I know when I was there, you were called an independent contractor. Yep. And that meant that you had to pay your own taxes. You had your own hospitalization, your own, insurance, and all they did was pay you, And we were, it's funny because I had a couple friends of mine that were lawyers, and they looked at the contract that Vince said, and one of my lawyers, who was an NFL linebacker and wound up being a hell of a lawyer, told me, he says, Jim, he says, don't sign this contract. He says, you're nothing more than an indentured slave.
Wow. Not good. Not good.
No, not good. But hey, if you want to wrestle, what else are you going to do?
Right, because he'll just get the next guy who will just take your place in 2 seconds.
Exactly. And Vince fired me 3 times, and a couple times it was I'm sure because he didn't like my political stance in terms of where I was with the active body wrestlers per se against, the office, because I wanted, a better representation. I thought, if you say, for instance, you got hurt in a match and had to have 20, 30 stitches, you had to pay for that yourself. They didn't pay it for you, and you tried to give them the bill, they wouldn't pay it. You're an independent contractor, and
that stinks.
And I remember our original contract with Vince said that the talent was going to get 25% of outside revenue, 25% of the gross outside revenue. So that was dolls and stuff like that wasn't, in with the WWE. So Brian and I actually sued Vince after we got done working for him. And we found out through our lawyer, through all this paperwork, instead of 25% of the gross, he paid us 8% of the net.
Oh my God. Wow.
So he owed a lot of guys hundreds of thousands of dollars, and that's, I mean, if you have your founding father, your leader, the owner of your company, the guy that you're, providing blood, sweat, and tears every night on the road, and he does that to you, I mean, what are you going to do?
Yeah, not good at all. Hey, is that why you're not in the Hall of Fame? Is that why the Killer Bees
That's
not in
it?
the Hall of Fame? Because of the lawsuit?
They've got guys in the Hall of Fame that I mean, the Rock and Roll Express, they were a good team down south. They never worked in the WWE, and they got in there.
A few shots, yeah.
And the fact that Brian and I were almost guaranteed the belts a couple different times never happened. And the fact that and I tell Brian it's my fault that we're not in the WWE Hall of Fame, because I just wouldn't take the shit from Vince constantly, and I got in his face a couple times and just said, hey, this isn't right, and he held that against me, and consequently, Brian and I will never be in the WWE Hall of Fame, at least while we're still alive.
Yeah. Is Brian okay with that, or is he bitter about it?
He's bitter because he wanted to be in the Hall of Fame. Some of his buddies are in there, Hulk's in it. Well, Hulk is, and there's some other guys, I think Valentine is in it. And, rightly so, but that whole group of guys during that, 80s period, they all should be in there because,
Yeah.
I mean, we worked our butts off, continuously, for the betterment of the WWF at that time. And, I mean, a token would be, you guys were good enough to get in the Hall of Fame, and rightly so. So I don't know if it'll happen, but it's funny because I was at a wrestling show and they had all these little vendors, and I found this vendor that had the knockoff WWE Hall of Fame ring. So I wound up buying a couple, one for Brian and one for me. And I said, "Here, Brian, here's our ring." And he saw, and he looked at it. He says, "It looks pretty good." I don't know if he wears it though.
Demolition isn't in, which is crazy. I don't know.
Yeah.
They had lost too, but like that's another one. People are like, "Wow, Demolition's not in the WWE Hall of Fame,"
and they're still working. Those I just saw Bill and Barry a couple 2-3 weeks ago, and they'll go in in a small match and just run in for a little bit, but they're Bill Eadie, he's a year older than me. He's 75. And Barry Darso's got to be about, I don't know, 60, 68. And they both look great too.
But it is crazy. Like you have one guy, basically Vince, can just decide like, yeah, this guy's a Hall of Famer. This guy's not a Hall of Famer. Obviously the lawsuit in both your cases plays a big factor, but it basically, he's the yay or nay. He makes the final call.
That's true. And I think his, I don't know if it was his former or his son-in-law right now, Paul, what's his name? Triple H. Yeah, he's a good guy. And I think he's, it's hard being, I don't know how the hell he ever wanted to get involved in the McMahon family. And I know that, he fell in love with the daughter, but, he seems to be a good guy, but, they just don't have much control. At least I don't think he does, and everybody says, "Oh, Vince is out of it now. He doesn't have control." I says, "Baloney." I says, that guy, even when they try to close the coffin on him, he'll be grabbing his hand outside the coffin, grabbing the WWE and pulling it towards him.
Wasn't that crazy how he quote unquote retired, and then all of a sudden he came back and they ended up, selling part of the company for $9.3 billion, basically. So it's like, was he really retired or was he really there the whole time?
I think it was a big work, he got in trouble, he had some affairs and had to pay off that hush money, and his good buddies, Donald Trump. So, but he must have learned from him. But he's just, I don't know. I never did get along with him. I remember, and I've said this on many podcasts, very first time I flew into Poughkeepsie, Illinois from not LaGuardia, but New Jersey. And I wound up flying into Newark and getting on a small prop jet with none other than Hillbilly Jim Morris. So this big guy, he's 6'8", a big guy. And I knew he was a wrestler, so I introduced myself. And we talked on the flight there. And then we got there. And then Gene Okerlund, who I'd worked with in the AWA as a, announcer for years, was having an interview, and they wanted me to do a babyface general interview. So they were asking me, Gene asked me, Jumpin' Jim, it's good, to have you here, and what are you looking forward to, and blah blah blah. So I did a real benign, sort of babyface interview. And after we were done, as I was walking away, I heard Vince say, "Oh God, we got another Backlund." And I thought, and I love Bob, and Bob, Bob made a fortune there, working for the old man, because his old man wanted to have a straight wrestler, world champion. And, Bob was there for 4 or 5 years, made a fortune. But, Vince couldn't stand him, and consequently, as soon as he could, he, got rid of him.
How did you actually get over there? Like, did somebody recruit you? Did Vince pick you out? Like, how did you actually?
Oh, no. What happened was Hulk went to the AWA in 82. And he came there and he just set the territory on fire. I mean, every house was sold out, and he was incredible. And Verne Gagne, who was the co-owner of the AWA, was a national champion, a collegiate champion, wrestled in the Olympics, and he was known as a shooter, and he didn't realize that Hulk Hogan was going to get over as big as he did. And the reason why Hulk left was, Verne didn't want to put the belt on him. He didn't want him to beat Nick Bockwinkel because, his pride couldn't stand having a muscle-bound guitar player be the world heavyweight champion of the AWA when he was, off and on for 20 years, collegiate champion and the Big Ten champion, Olympic wrestler. He couldn't, his ego wouldn't allow that. So Hulk left, went to New York, and then there was just a drainage, suction of talent through all the 26 different areas, territories where you could wrestle back and, in the 70s and 60s, 70s and 80s until then. And Vince got all the talent. Vince got 60 guys that were all top guys. And he, this was what happened after Hulk left. And, I had a gym in my hometown of White Bear Lake, Minnesota, and I needed still extra money to make it, work. So I told Verne, I said, I need, I said, I've been partners with Greg for 10 years. And I said, we've had a good run. And I said, I want to stay here, but at the same time, the house has been horrible, and I said, I need a personal guarantee from you, a contract for $95,000 a year, which wasn't much, And he looked at me and he said, well, Jim, he says, you're not worth it. He says, go to New York. So the next week I had my first match in New York, and I never looked back, and I feel horrible because that, I don't feel horrible because at that time I was in the prime of my career. And if I wanted to make money, which I still needed to do, I had to go to New York like everybody else.
Very true. And obviously Hulk and you were buddies, right? I mean, or at least friendly.
Yeah, we were really good friends. And he said, hey, he says, there's no guarantee, but I can get you in here. So when I first went in there, I thought it was going to be a single. And then as I looked around, and then all of a sudden, Brian Blair came in from Tampa. He was another friend of Hulk. So they decided to make us, a tag team, which was, I didn't care, as long as we made money. Yep. And then when they called us the Killer Bees and then gave us that mask gimmick, which was just incredible, I thought, man, this is going to work out, incredibly well. And it never really got on fire. I mean, Vince could have, used those masks. He could have sold those masks, along with the T-shirts and the lunch buckets and this and that. We could have made a fortune, but he didn't like it.
Whose idea was putting the Killer Bees together? Because I know Hulk says that it was his idea, and I'm sure maybe a bit of Brian, a bit of you, but whose idea was it to actually put you two guys together?
Well, actually, it was, I'm trying to think of his name, and he's from Toronto, Billy Red Lions. He was a big guy in Toronto, wrestler, and he worked for the WWF at that time, in promotion, also a little bit of on air, with the microphone. He came to us with an idea, and he says, you guys should be called the Killer Bees, and I thought, that sounds good to me. Brian, Blair and Brunzell. And then it was shortly thereafter, we were in Toronto, and Lanny Poffo, God rest his soul, had a brand new set of two pair of tights that were black and yellow. So we conjured these. We said, we'll pay you for. So we wore those tights that night I can't remember where we were. It was small town outside of Toronto. And And then that's when the Killer Bees were born. And then we got the idea of having the mask because we were both about the same size. And it was the first time that the baby faces ever used the heel gimmick to get over. And it worked. It worked. It was great, you know. And I remember the first night we used the mask, it was in Buffalo, New York, and we were wrestling the Hearts, and they were the tag team champions. And it wasn't a championship match, but we wound up doing the switcheroo, and boom, we wound up beating them, and the people went absolutely crazy. But they never did, you know, put the belts on us. And shortly thereafter, I mean, you know, we had a good run, but, you know, it was nothing what it could have been.
Did they ever promise you to win the tag team titles?
They did. Yeah, they did.
Like, how did that go down? What did they say?
Well, they just said eventually you guys are going to be champions, and, you know, it's just the right timing and circumstance. And, you know, and I heard that and I thought, okay, you know, usually if they say that, they, you know, then the next week or 2 weeks, you know, you're going to be in Madison Square Garden or Boston Garden or, you know, Philly or something like that. And you're going to slip and, you know, boom, you're going to wind up taking the belts from the Hearts or whoever it was, you know, but it never happened.
Why though? Like, it would have been awesome, but don't you think? I think that Killer Bees tag team champs would have been great. It's funny, like if you look at that era, like the Rougeos didn't win the tag titles, the Rockers technically didn't win the tag titles. Interesting, like basically the Hearts, the Bulldogs, Demolition were kind of like the stalwarts of the division.
Mm-hmm. Well, and to be honest, the Bees had great matches with the Bulldog. We had a match in Montreal, 30-minute draw with the Bulldogs. It was exceptional. And then we had a match with Tito Santana and Rick Martel. And I think that was in Montreal. And it was a 30-minute draw. It was incredible because we could work, you know, we could work with guys and we could work with the heels. And to be honest with you, the best heel team at that time was the Hearts, but, you know, Bret Hart carried that team because Neidhart could talk, but he was like a bull in a china cabinet in the ring. He was horrible. You know, he was clumsy. He didn't want to get hurt. And, you know, he had some other things going that hurt his career. And consequently, we had to pay that price.
When you look at it, I mean, that tag team division is absolutely amazing. Obviously, you mentioned the Hearts and the Bulldogs, but man, the Dream Team even pretty good. Obviously, Sheik and Volkoff. I mean, there's a ton of teams, right?
Yeah, Sheik and Volkoff. Jesus, we had some matches with them, and it was funny. They used the match at WrestleMania 3 with the Bees against Volkoff and Sheik, and they used the whole match to get Jim Neidhart over. And I said to Brian, I says, you know, because after the match, George Scott says, well, you know, after the match, we want you guys to, you know, really, you know, put your hands on the back of Anvil or not. Yeah. You know, to congratulate him, you know, for interfering and causing you to lose the match. Hacksaw, excuse me.
Oh, Jim Duggan. Yeah.
Duggan and I said, you got to be kidding me. I said, why in the hell, you know, and George Scott and he was the worst booker I've ever been involved with. I'll tell you a story, John. When I was in Charlotte in the Mid-Atlantic, I was the Mid-Atlantic champion, and I was doing a couple different deals with Ray Stevens, Kenny Patera, and then Khosrow, the Iron Sheik. So the Iron Sheik beat me on TV using his loaded boot. Boom, you know, he kicked me, boom, down I went, 1, 2, 3. He gets the belt. So about 2 weeks later, I'm wrestling him on TV. So I wind up, you know, switcherooing, and I wound up putting the sleeper on him. Boom, I put him out. I took his boot off, and I went to the interview, and I said, I've got the Sheik's boot now. I'm going to get my belt back. So the next week, I'm wrestling. It's 3. We had a matinee. We had one at 3:00 in Roanoke, Virginia, which is about 90, 100 miles from Charlotte. And then we had the main event match again was in Charlotte at 7:30. So I go to Roanoke. I get in the locker room, and Sandy Scott, who was George Scott's brother, comes up to me and he says, "Did you get the finish for the match?" And I said, "No." I said, "What is it?" And he says, "George wants you to do an hour draw." I said, "What?" He said, "An hour draw." I said, "Sandy," I said, "if we do an hour draw, you might as well dig a hole in the middle of the ring and bury me there, because I won't draw a dime for you from now on." I said, "If I'm the ex-champion and I've got his gimmick boot and I can't beat him in 60 minutes, what else is there?"
Right.
And Sandy says, "Well, that's what George wanted." So we did that hour draw. It was horrible match. And it was, and that night we had to do a 45-minute match. And about a week later, this was my demise in the Mid-Atlantic. I was wrestling Khosrow in this Indian reservation. And I'm trying to think where the heck it was, but it was a small little place not too far from Charlotte, and they wanted us to do an hour draw in this Indian reservation. So I said, okay, so we're doing this match, boom, 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 and it was about 40 minutes, and all of a sudden Khosrow goes outside and hurts his back, and he's laying there on the ground. He said, "Oh, Jim, my back." So I thought he was hurt, so we both got counted out at about 45 minutes. So, there's no title change or nothing. So right. 9:00 the next morning, I get a call from the secretary at the office, and she says, "Jim, George would like to have you come in and talk to him." And I said, "Okay." So I drive in there, and 9:00, and I said, "George, what's up?" And he says, "Geez," he says, "what happened last night?" He said, "I want you guys to go an hour." And I said, "Khosrow got hurt, so we just got counted out." And he says, "No, he told me he wasn't hurt." I said, "What?" He says, "Yeah, he told me he wasn't hurt." And I said, "Well, he told me he was hurt." And he says, "Well, Jim," he says, "I got to let you go." So he fired me.
Oh, my God.
So I thought, well, I needed to get out of North Carolina. And it was funny because Khosrow, who I broke in with, back in 72, and he was the most pious, religious Arab, you ever want to meet. And he didn't drink or smoke. And he got so corrupted in the pro wrestling business. It was a shame. I mean, it was horrible. And it's funny because not only did I get fired by him, I had my worst match with him. And I also had a match in Richmond, Virginia, where he got carried away he had this tag team rope, and it was just he and I in the ring and making a big comeback. He stopped me and he put this rope around my neck and he choked me to the point where I was almost unconscious. And he went to throw me through the ropes, and I fell through the ropes and I hit the side of my head. I had 29 stitches in the side of my eyebrow here. Geez. And I was out like a mackerel. And he said to me, "What happened?" And I said, "Khosrow," I said, "you choked the shit out of me." I said, yeah. And he says, "No." So I was glad to get out of, Charlotte. And, I saw Khosrow many times since, and I, worked with him in New York, and he was just, God bless him. The substance abuse just took over his life. He was just completely gone. Didn't, I'm surprised he lasted as long as he did. And it's just a shame, that, it ruined his life.
Why did he say he wasn't hurt to George Scott, though? He
didn't want to take the blame. He put the blame on me. He's not going to take the blame.
Did he realize it was going to get you fired, though?
I don't know, but he'd rather say, "Well, I'd rather have the heat on Jim than me."
Right. Why? What was his deal with Brian Blair? Why was he so obsessed with him? Remember, he would always say, "I'm going to break your back."
Here's the deal. Brian was an amateur wrestler. at Louisville. So we were in a match one time, and I can't remember. Cosgrove was in there, and he was healing all of something. I tagged Brian, and Brian got in there, and he did a couple amateur moves on Cosgrove and took him down and rode him. And Cosgrove got just furious, and from that point on, he was just, I was Iranian 181-pound champion, and this, young whippersnapper from Florida, he couldn't, and that hurt Cosgrove's pride. So he just went crazy. I remember hearing stuff he used to say, and it was just obscene, what he was going to do to Brian. And I thought, come on, guys. But, he was so out of it. He used to drink a case of beer a day, St. Pauli girl. And he'd smoke a lot of dope, and then he'd do a lot of coke. And he did that every day. And, Jesus, God, what a prescription for, ruining your life and your career. And, I think people talk to him about it and everything. And, he even flunked a drug test at the WWF. They did a drug test, and they said, Vince came up to him and he says, Cosgrove, you were positive on your test. And he says, oh, good, positive, that means good. and Vince says, no, it doesn't. He says, you flunked, so it's just too bad.
What a nut. Yeah. Oh my God. But it was so funny. Like, he was obsessed with Brian Blair. I'm going to humble him. I'm going to break his back. Like, and saying all that sorts of stuff, even worse.
Oh, like, horrible. Horrible. And I tell you what, there's no way that, Cosgrove might have been doing something, when he amateur, back when he was, 30 years old, but Brian would have kicked his ass. He would have hurt him bad. Because Cosgrove thinks, I can beat you wrestling, but, a street fighter isn't going to say, okay, I'm going to get down on all fours. He's going to kick you in the throat and pull your eye out, and there where you're going to be. You're going to be laying there in shock. So, right. And I think that was Cosgrove's big, he never did understand.
Is Brian the tough guy?
Yeah, Brian's pretty tough. He's pretty salty. He's a tough kid. He can handle himself. He's 6 feet. Now he's just had another surgery on his back. It was just horrible. And he was having trouble walking. He lost about 40 pounds. And it was 2-3 weeks ago. He had a 2-day surgery in July, the end of July. And they cut him from the top of his neck all the way down to almost, his tailbone. And they had to redo what had happened. This long story made, a long story made short. What happened, the last surgery he had, which was about 3 years ago, they fused his back and they stuck a drain hose in his back to drain the fluid and everything. So they encouraged him. They said, Brian, if you got to take a pee, get up, go take a pee, so he got up out of his bed, walked, but when he walked, he hooked that drain cord on the side of his bed and he pulled it loose. He didn't know it. So he goes in the bathroom, but the cord, the hose was dragging on the floor. So wow. He told the nurse that. So the nurse comes in and takes the hose and sticks it back in his back after it had been, on the floor. And he wound up getting osteomyelitis. He almost died. He had a temperature of 105. He's going to have a hell of a lawsuit. And he damn near died. He was in the hospital for 3-4 weeks, and he lost all this weight. And what happened was osteomyelitis dissolved his, his lumbars, the bones in his back. And he went through holy hell. And he had to take a shot a week, and the shot was $5,000 a week. And I think he had to pay like $2,200, and he had to have 6 shots before that. And what this did was this would reset the bone in his back to make it strong enough so he could have surgery.
Wow, Jesus.
So I'm going to see him. Let's see. We're going to go to what they call a gathering in North Carolina.
Yes.
And it's this weekend. And they're going to give Brian and I some sort of a award Friday night. So this will be his first time that I've seen him, or, since the surgery. So I'm hoping for the best, but, we'll see. But, yeah, he's gone through an awful lot. And, I won't mention that, but he had a tragedy in his family a couple years ago where his son was murdered on a drug deal gone bad. And it just was devastating for him, and rightly so. And he still hasn't recovered.
Have you guys been close, like throughout this whole time? Like, from
oh yeah, we did some. We went to we teamed up and we went to Malaysia and Singapore and Borneo, and then we worked for the UWF, whatever that was. That was that crazy guy out in Vegas,
Herb Abrams.
Oh God, what a knucklehead he was! My God, but he liked us, and I could see right off the bat that his venture wasn't going to work. But he insisted on doing it, and he was a party guy, and he tried hard, and he had a couple. I remember we went to MGM Grand Hotel in Vegas, and they have a huge area in the back where they have huge concerts and everything, and we had a match there, matches, and he probably had, I don't know, 5,000-6,000 people, but it held about 15, or It was just, but for what he did, it was pretty good in Vegas, and he was real excited, about it, and happy, and he just he bit off more than he could chew.
Pretty crazy if you actually look at UWF. Like, he got Bruno to come over, he got Andre the Giant for a show, got you guys, got Paul Orndorff, got Snuka. It's like, wow, like whatever he was doing, even though he didn't really do it that well, he somehow was able to get some pretty big, high profile names in there.
Well, he paid the guys, well to come. That was it. If you're going to pay me X amount of dollars, I'm going to come for
I'll
you.
show up. Yeah.
But the only problem is there was no rhyme or reason, or he didn't have. The biggest thing, he didn't have the TV connections, John. If you didn't have the TV connections in wrestling, and that's one reason why Vince was so overwhelming to begin with, because he had Dick Ebersol, who was the head of ABC Wide World of Sports, or whatever it was. Vince hired him to produce his television show. So most guys in most, territories and different promoters would spend about probably $3,000 to $5,000 on their weekly television promotion of the wrestling show. Vince had spent $200,000. It was the difference between the Yankees and the Mud Hens from Iowa. Right. It was, and nobody could compete with Vince, and that's what happened.
What do you think was, like, besides that, like the secret sauce of WWF that made him work? Like the TV production, Vince on one end.
It was Hulk Hogan.
Okay, I was going to say, would it be a guy like Hulk? Because I always called the Hogan era. Yeah,
Hulk was the golden goose. Vince, the WWF would never be what it is today without Hulk Hogan. He was the boom. He was the golden goose. I'll never forget. Even when he was in Minneapolis, he drew record crowds that were just unbelievable. And then when he went to New York, this is the truth. He was making on royalties every week $50,000. This is back in 1983, 84, 85, 86. Right. He was in 1985. I have it somewhere, and I was looking for it today. I have a Sports Illustrated, and it says Sports top banana, and it had Hulk Hogan on there. $10 million a year in 1985. He was the highest paid American athlete.
pretty amazing. And to me, because it's funny, my boss was asking me, it's funny, my mom had asked me, she's like, what was it back in 84 and 85 that made you like Hulk Hogan like wrestling? I was like, he's a real life superhero, and you almost can't describe it. Like, his charisma is just like off the charts.
Well, not only did he have the charisma and the rap, but he was athletic. I mean, you could go right now and look at New Japan and see some of the matches he had with Antonio Inoki. Oh, he was athletic. He could get down and wrestle on the damn mat. And, here he was 6'8", 300 pounds. And he was a quiet guy. I really appreciated him. I was glad that he was my friend. And it's funny right now because I never call him. I got his telephone number, but he's, I called him once and left a message and I never heard from him again. I know he's way too busy, to talk to, Jumpin' Jim, from 40 years ago, but, I still consider him a friend. And I'm sure if, we'd see each other, we'd give each other a big hug and reminisce and things would be cool.
I always say, like, the Hogan era, really, 84 to 93, WWF, obviously, that's when the business skyrocketed. Global domination, WrestleMania was created, Saturday Night's Main Event on NBC, 33 million people watching Hogan versus Andre. I always say, like, that was the jumping off period that so many fans became fans of wrestling. Even me still watch today because I was watching because Hulk back in 84 and 85.
Well, he made it mainstream.
Yep.
I mean, that was it. I mean, I remember WrestleMania 3, we were doing some publicity work and talking and we were outside and watched, and there was 23 different countries represented there as far as their TV, personnel. 23 countries. It was unbelievable. And, they had Aretha Franklin, singing she was standing right outside our locker room practicing, the national anthem. And it was just unbelievable. I was just fortunate, that we were, even though the match was horrible, the finish of the match, but it was fun being there. And I'll never forget, it's funny because everybody said, oh God, can you imagine how much money, they made? We never knew how much money they made. Some people said they made $30 million, some said 60 on the pay-per-view, and who knows. But I remember, this is what I heard. We didn't get paid for 6 weeks. And this is what the scuttlebutt was, that the office, Vince, took the money and they put it in CDs for 6 weeks. And then they paid the boys on the interest that they got from that. And of course, Hulk and Andre got $1 million. And there was a couple other guys that made 50 grand. The rest of us made $10,000, which you think 10 grand is a lot, for one day. But when you think if it was, say it was $30 million, take 2 million away, 28, whatever else, even $15 million to play with, $10,000 is not very much.
Could have gotten more. Yeah, for sure.
Oh God. Well, if they would have given us 50,000, that would have been, everybody would have just fell over backwards.
Man, just think about the money. And did you make a ton of money off the LJN, off the action figure?
No.
Back then? Oh, you didn't?
We had to sue to get, did I tell you this yet? I don't know. But in our original contract, we were supposed to get 25% of the gross from outside revenue.
Right. And you only got 8. Yeah.
8% of the net. So when you figure that out, and we were, I remember our lawyer said, well, you guys should have got about 300 grand.
Wow.
And
but that was in the action figures too?
Yeah, just the action figures alone.
Oh, just that. Okay.
I remember when they had the first tier guys get, Cosro and Greg Valentine and Hulk and
Hillbilly Jim. Yeah.
Yeah. $92,000 Cosro had a check for.
Yes, that's what I was going to say. I know a lot of the guys, and I know Hulk's was like astronomical.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
Yeah. But 92 grand. And then Brian and I get one for 10,000. And I thought, what? $10,000? You know, and I was happy, but still 10, you know, Jesus, gosh.
Yeah. You know, though, why everybody bought the Sheik, right? Because Hulk needed somebody to beat up. That's why everybody bought the Sheik doll.
Oh, sure. Yeah. And, you know, he was just a likely nemesis. You know, he was a perfect heel for it, you know, and, you know, Hulk was the all-American boy and Khosrow was the Iranian devil.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
When you look at that time period, and like you said, you got fired 3 times. When were the 3 times that you got fired, though? Because it seemed like
towards the end,
pretty consistent. Oh, towards the end.
Yeah. See what happened. I think it was 89. He let a number of us go, and Brian thought, well, good, this is going to be an opportunity because Brian had just bought 3 Gold's gyms and had them running down in Tampa, Florida. But like I mentioned, I had my own gym in White Bear Lake, and I needed the money, you know, so I had to still wrestle, you know, for Vince to still make some money. And even when I wrestled part-time, John, I was making, you know, 45 to 50,000 a year part-time, you know, which was almost as much as I was making full-time with her. Right. But, you know, I couldn't turn that down. So along with my willingness to stay there, it invoked Vince taking advantage of me as, you know, as who I was, you know, to beat me on TV, you know, with whoever he wanted to, you know, and it hurt me, but I needed the job, and I had some great matches. I had a match with Randy Savage that was incredible. Matter of fact, it's on YouTube right now, and it was on one of our, I think it was on one of the first Raws, and at that time he had a girl. What was her name? God, it wasn't Elizabeth, but it was Scary Sherry.
Sherry Martel.
Yes. And I remember the match. First deal, first opening salvo. Randy grabs a headlock on me. I throw him off. I drop down. He comes across. I leapfrog him in, and he comes across again, and I hit him right smack in the mouth with the drop kick. And he gets up spitting blood. So I thought he knocked his teeth out. So I thought, oh, geez, here we go. But we had a hell of a match. And it was funny because after the match, Vince, as we came through the curtains, he shook both of our hands. And I don't know if it was bullshit or not, but he says, that was the best TV match I've ever seen. And it was. Yeah. So, wow. You know, I needed him and he needed me, and it worked out okay. Although, you know, Brian could see the handwriting on the wall, and he didn't want to get beat. He didn't want to get beat on TV, so he left. So if I could have left, I would have, but I needed the money.
Was Savage pissed at you as far as?
No. Matter of fact, he thought, no, I apologized. And he says, I told him, I said, Randy, when you come off the ropes, I says, put your hand right like this above your face, because I always aim for the head.
Right.
Yeah, and he came flying off that bull. I hit him, and I thought, oh, Jesus. But he said, Jimmy, that's okay. You know, and it was, you know, he cut about, he had a good cut in the side of his lip, but it did knock his teeth out.
How was he backstage? I know everyone says, like, oh, he's a reputation of being nuts, but I hear, like, a lot of the other side of the spectrum, too, that he was an awesome friend, an awesome guy. He was, like, the charitable wrestler.
He was. His dad instilled in him at a young age. His dad, Angelo Poffo, you know, went through that era in the 50s, 60s, and early 70s where you really couldn't trust anybody. You know, that's the way it was in pro wrestling. You know, guys went from territory to territory to territory, and some guys had reputations. You know, you can't trust them. You know, and be careful, this and that, and I think Angelo instilled on both Lanny and Randy is that, hey, you know, you've got to take care of yourself. You can't trust anybody. And if you want to succeed in this business, that's the way you have to go about your business. And that's what he did. He was very professional. Always, he was extremely financially aware of his expenditures. Because I remember Lanny and him and Elizabeth all used to stay in one room. They cut the expense of a motel room. Yeah. And, he was probably making, he was probably making $50,000 a month then. And he was a hell of a worker and had a hell of a run. And I mean, the matches that him and I want to say Steamboat, but there was another incredible worker. Oh my goodness, they had some great talent there and great matches. Another great guy who was there was Bobby Orton Jr. and also Jake Roberts. Those two guys, along with Steamboat and Randy, were 5 of the top 10 workers in the world at that time. They were incredible.
And then on top of it, Randy, when he feuded with Hulk, well, even as the Mega Powers together, when he feuded with Hulk, they made more money than Hulk and Andre made.
Oh yeah, they did, because they had more of a match. Everybody, if you saw Andre's match with somebody, it was very similar with everybody he worked with.
Yep.
Unless they were the size and caliber of Hulk. And it was hard being a giant. Andre was a dear friend of mine, and I'll tell you a real quick story. He was working in the AWA and working the big battle royals, and we were down in Peoria, Illinois, and the next shot was Chicago. So Wally Carbo, who was Verne's partner in the AWA, told me, he said, Jim, I want you to get a Cadillac, and I want you to make sure that you take Andre and you drive him from Peoria, to Chicago that same night after the matches. So he gets there in time. And I said, okay, I will. So I get a big Cadillac, boom, boom, boom. So we get done with our matches in Peoria. So about 110 miles to Chicago. So we're driving down the road, and Andre says, Jim. And I said, yeah. He says, beer. So we had to stop for some beer. And I thought, well, I'm not going to drink any beer. So he got a 12-pack or something like that. And I had a big bottle of Pepsi. So I'm going down the road, and he was going to meet his girlfriend, who he was flying in from, Toronto, in Chicago. So he wanted, me to speed it up. So I'm going, and all of a sudden I see this cop coming. I was going north, and he's coming south, and he comes through the median, and I know that son of a gun is going to get me. So I pull over, and he comes up behind me, and he comes to the door, and he says, why I stopped you? And I said, yes, sir. I said, I think I might be speeding. I said, I'm trying to get my friend here to the airport. He's got to fly to New York on a private plane. And he says, well, you're speeding. And then he said to Andre, he says, what do you have in the bag between your legs? And Andre says, beer. And he says, what do you have? And Andre said, beer. So the cop steps back, and he says, get out of the car. So Andre gets out of the car, and this cop had no idea he was that big.
Right.
And the cop looked at him. So he had a 12-pack of beer, and 7 bottles were gone in 10 miles.
Holy moly.
Andre drank 7 bottles in 10 miles.
Shit.
And the cop said to me, he says, did you have any of that? And I said, no, I'm drinking Pepsi. So he says, okay, open up your trunk. So I opened the trunk. He put the beer in there, and he says, I'm going to give you a speeding ticket. He says, I'm not going to give you an open bottle. I should, but I'm not going to. And I said, well, thank you, sir. So he gives me a speeding ticket. And I think it's probably an $80 ticket. I think I was going 65 or 68 in a 55. So we go down the road, and I'm driving along, and Andre says, Jimmy, pull over. And I says, what for? And he says, I want the rest of the beer. So that was a long story short, but that was true, and yeah, he was a character.
I guess those stories of him drinking like copious amounts are not made up at all. I guess they're true.
He had 3 bottles of Merlot before every match.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, he'd sit there and he'd play cribbage. And he'd have his tights down to his ankles, and he had his little jock on, and he had his boots, that zippered up and everything. And he'd sit there and he'd play the doggone cribbage left and right. And then, he'd have the Merlot and he'd drink it, and he had a water glass, be like a 16-ounce water glass. And he'd drink, 3 bottles, and it wouldn't affect him.
Did he get like buzzed at all, like from that, or no?
No, I don't think so. I remember this is the truth. We were in High Steak Loft, which is a beautiful steak house in Winnipeg, Canada, and we had a record house there, and there was 10 of us out to dinner. And Verne Gagne was a promoter, and he was paying for the meal. So we went through, this is the truth, 33 bottles of this Royal Dunaville, 10 people.
Whoa.
And Andre must have had 5 bottles himself. And it was the most delicious. It was called Royal Dunaville. It was a sparkling rosé, and it had just a little sweetness to it. And the owner of the club, our High, says, I've never had this happen before. You drank us out of the completely dry of the wine.
Whoa. Wow. Oh my God.
But there was, 13 of us. So I mean,
you guys could drink. Oof.
Oh, well, Andre, 5, but I imagine each one of us had at least a bottle, over the course of 3 hours.
Man, it's like the Wild West back then. And we were kind of saying before we even jumped on air how it was really the Wild West, even with like Dr. Zahorian, and like you guys can just get and do whatever you wanted back then. It's like just pure pandemonium almost.
Well, it was. And, there was a price to pay for everything you did. And that was the tragedy of that era, because, when you're young like that and you have an opportunity to make money and get some notoriety and be visible, and you don't want it to end. And then at the same time, you want to do everything to enhance your personality as far as, what they get, and so, everybody took steroids. I mean, it was, it wasn't like, Hulk was taking steroids. It was everybody. And everybody, used, dexedrine for speed, and they used cocaine, and they used, painkillers and sleeping pills. And that's why so many guys, died of overdoses in the late 80s and 90s. They just didn't realize they couldn't mix that stuff and drink alcohol. You tell these guys you can't do that. I told a couple guys I know that have passed away, and I told them, I said, you cannot mix all that stuff because it'll kill you. And they looked at me and laughed at me. And it was tragic. And, Vince jumped on him, but, he jumped on it, but it's still, you look at the guys right now wrestling, and don't tell me they're not using, drugs to enhance their physiques. It's impossible.
They're doing something. I don't know. ERT or whatever. I know at a certain age you can get that from a doctor no matter what, but there's definitely
I've never heard of ERT. What is it?
TRT, testosterone replacement therapy.
Oh, okay. Well,
so you get some testosterone.
Yeah, well, testosterone is an androgenic, which doesn't do as much as an anabolic steroid. Well, anabolic steroid is the one that puts the big muscle on, whereas the androgenic testosterone will make you harder, but it will mess with your mind. It'll make you more aggressive, and it's not very good. I know a lot of guys that flew off the handle, because they were using the Anadrol, which was a combination of, testosterone and a couple other steroids, and boom, these guys used to take 3 cc's a week, and go on, and you're only supposed to take steroids for 6 to 8 weeks at a time, 1 shot a week. These guys were, and these cycles, these guys were doing, 3 to 5 cc's a week, every week for months on end. And they get pockets on their hip, where they had scar tissue, and Jesus, you just think, holy smokes, and I took, I took my share. I used to have a favorite. It was, it wasn't Winstrol, but it was Therabol, and it's from France, and it was a lean, hard steroid that injectable, and you take it, and it just make you muscular, and it was very anabolic, but not very androgenic, so it didn't mess with your mind. And then I took that Anavar, which is 2.5 milligrams, and I take 2 tablets a day for 30 days, and that was it. And then I took the shots for 6 weeks, and that was it for the whole year. And it helped. It helped me. I worked out all the time, and I ate very well. But when you see these guys that comes, and they become addicted. They become addicted to that feeling in their body plus the look. And then it got to the point where sometimes guys were using the steroids, and they were searching for another steroid that they could use because they had drawn blanks on the ones they were using. Their body had become accustomed to it, and it didn't work.
What a crazy era, but obviously eventually steroid trial happened. Vince got out of it thanks to Jerry McDavid. Vince got out of it, beat the government, but it just led to basically Hulk leaving. It led to Bulldog leaving, Warlord. All the big muscle bound guys were basically gone after the steroid trial really hit.
Yeah. You said that you interviewed Jerry McDavid, huh?
Yes.
Yeah. Is he still alive?
Yes. Yep. He's actually retiring at the end of this year as Vince's lawyer. So Vince, he's screwed after this. How many times he say Vince is
oh my God. Yeah. Oh my God.
He must be a damn good lawyer though, because he rarely loses.
Well, I dealt with him a couple times, and to be honest with you, John, he's sort of a prick. Really? But all good lawyers are pricks, probably.
Got it.
And I remember we had, when Brian and I first sued him for this royalties for these dolls, we had a lady from Stamford, Connecticut, a lawyer, represent us, and we had to go in for depositions, and he was there, and he was asking questions, she was asking questions, and all of a sudden he slammed his hand down or something like that, and he says, her name was Myra. He says, Myra, he says, you just showed me you don't know what the fuck about any of the law is. And that's what he said to her.
Wow.
And I thought, you prick, because she was 45 years old, 50 years old, and just trying to do, and then he insults her like that, and she was visibly shaken. And I thought, why, that prick? But that's the way he was, and that's what Vince wanted.
Hey, he helped them beat the government, and a lot of other people. I think really, I know Jesse Ventura beat them, but it's very few and far between of people, right, that actually ended up beating WWF in any of those cases.
Well, I beat him twice, 2 out of 2 times.
Oh, you did. So what did you end up getting? Like, was it the royalty stuff?
Yeah. Brian and I got a sum, which wasn't close, but it was good. We had to split it 3 ways. And then originally, John, when I went there, when the dolls were first made, Greg Gagne, unbeknown to me, signed my name on an LJN contract to produce high flyer dolls. So Vince, after about 6 weeks, calls me into the office, and I'm over there, and I sit down, and he has these dolls, and he says, what's this? And I see it's Jumping Jim Brunzell and Greg Gagne, the high flyers. I said, I haven't a clue. I said, I don't know. I said, I never signed that. And I said, why would I sign a contract if I'm coming to the WWE?
Right.
So I called Greg, and I said, Greg, I said, how in the world did those high flyer dolls get produced from LJN? And he said, well, I signed your name on the contract. And I said, why would you do that? I said, you knew I was going to New York. And you know what he said to me? He says, Jim, they wouldn't have made the dolls unless I had both signatures.
Oh my God, that's not
So
good.
what happened was Vince took the upfront money that I was supposed to get. It was $12,500, and because this happened before I signed with Vince, my lawyer, who was my dear friend from college, sued Vince and we won. So we got the $12,500 back from Vince. He hated that. So right off the bat, I had a couple, that's when I first started. So right away I had a pin in my voodoo doll, John.
Yeah, big time. Hey, you had a pretty good record though against them court-wise because nobody else really did. Maybe Warrior forgetting his name, and maybe Jesse forgetting his royalties.
Yeah, I think there was a number of guys because I had talked to, I think, another lawyer that we were talking to about proceeding, and he said that there was a number of litigations where Vince didn't do well and had to pay off. And that was a lot of talent, down the road that, he screwed everybody, unless you were a guy, probably like, who's the kid from Minnesota now, the ex-Olympic wrestler? And
Brock Lesnar?
Yeah, Lesnar. He's making, I don't know, he's making $7 million or $8 million a year. And he only wrestles about, 6 times a month.
Just the big shows. Yeah.
Yeah. So he's got it made, but, there's, I would be curious to see, I know that some of these guys in NXT are probably making, in the vicinity of 95,000, which isn't bad if you're just starting out. I think, like I mentioned, the biggest year that we had, Brian and I, was 125 grand, which is nothing compared to, wrestling 30 times a month.
Right.
That's 300 times.
Yep.
Plus being on the road and sacrificing everything. Jesus. Bad news.
Yeah. Yeah. But as we hit the wind down here, we head towards the finish. Could talk to you forever, but don't want to abuse your time. But I got to ask this, though. The drop kick. I mean,
yes,
you're obviously one of the high flyers, one of the best drop kicks. Do you put yourself at the top of the list, one of the greatest drop kicks of all time?
Well, for 20 years, I had the greatest drop kick. I mean, I'm sure there's somebody now, but I was a high jumper in high school and college. I high jumped 6, 7.5 the old way, and I had 37-inch vertical jump. And
wow.
So they say white men couldn't jump, but I could. And I would, I played. I was 6'1" on a basketball team in high school, and I could out jump any center in the league. And I rebound well, and I used that. To my advantage, but it actually ruined my shoulders because when I'd come down, I'd land on my forearms and it acted like a shock absorber. And when it did, it ruined my shoulder joints. So I had this shoulder, they went in and carved up all these calcium deposits. And then I had both the shoulders replaced. And then from jumping so much, my knees were both shot. So, and you're standing and starting and jumping. And, I played, high school and college football, and 1 year a semi-pro. And that took a toll on me too. But matter of fact, I wanted to show you this. This is a book that I wrote. It's called Matlands. Yeah. And I wrote it in 2016 by myself. I didn't have any writer. And that picture right there, I was 6 years old, and I was sitting in this chair in an island in the South Pacific, Marshall Islands. It's called Kwajalein. And my dad was a air sea rescue. So that's why I got this picture. But I'm just going to show you real quick, John. This picture was the drop kick of, it was in Toronto, and it was in the Toronto Sun the very next day. It was the big event. It was Paul Orndorff against
Hulk Hogan.
They had 55,000 people there, and it was Brian and I against the Funk Brothers. And two of the best drop kick pictures I've ever had taken were me drop kicking Dory Funk Jr. And this is it. So, So, I was blessed. I I know there's a lot of good, I don't watch that much right now, but for what I did, for how long I did, I considered, myself to be, and people told me when I was wrestling that there was nobody that could compare, to my drop kick. And I thought that was, pretty good. And I relished in that, and I took pride in it. And I, when people say, oh yeah, you had a great drop kick, I say, thank you.
Definitely had an awesome drop kick. There was actually a Japanese guy today, Okada. I don't know if you ever heard of him. He might have the best drop kick of today's breed of wrestlers, but amazing like athletic ability because he's big. I mean, he's big, like he's like 6'2", 6'3". So pretty impressive to kind of get that kind of that height on it, really.
Yeah. Well, see, that's what you do. You have to jump. You have to get vertically up to get your hips on the same range as the guy's head. And that's when you can lay out and extend your feet. And then you got a drop kick.
Love it. Who's your favorite opponents, like of all time? Up there? Hearts?
Nick Bockwinkel was one of my Bret Hart was great. Bobby Orton Jr. I had a tremendous matches with him. Let me see.
Macho Man, obviously.
Yeah, that one Macho Man. Kenny Patera and I had a hell of a run in Charlotte, and over the Mid-Atlantic Championship belt. And I was blessed, I mean, I the secret really to my success in professional wrestling, John, was my wife, because she took care of, our kids, raised my kids when I was gone. I was literally gone for, a good 5 or 6 year period. I was wrestling every day, and gone and been to Japan 6 times, and Australia, and I was very fortunate that the business didn't kill me like it did so many other people, and there's a lot of temptation, and I was very fortunate to wind up where I'll be 74 in 2 weeks, and I feel very blessed, that I can still smile and talk, so.
Yep. So as far as you and where everybody can get maybe the comic books, your book, Matt Lance, all that stuff, like where can everybody get all that stuff?
You can get this book on Blurb, BLURB. It's an online service. I sent them the manuscript. They produced the book, and a matter of fact, I got to show you something here, and you'll get a kick out of this.
Look at that young guy in the back cover. My goodness.
Yeah, God Almighty, Jesus, God, what happens? But let me see, where is it here? I'm coming up on it. The Magic Rat, where is he? Oh gosh sakes! Here it is. I had a chapter on here on Bruce. And I met Bruce in 1984 at the Civic Center after that's my kids right there with them. And then let's see, where is there's me with him, and he's been so damn good. I just love him. I've seen him. Here's one from Chicago.
Obviously, we were talking about before we got on, we were talking about Asbury Park, Bruce Springsteen.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I met him. He's been very kind to me. I've seen him 44 times in 45 years in 13 different cities. And I saw him in St. Paul. I might go to Winnipeg and see him, but it's always a treat. I think he's the greatest performer ever.
Wow, big Bruce fan. Nice. I've seen him only a couple times. I've only seen him twice. Yeah.
He the second time I saw him, it was in Chicago at the a little theater, and I was guest. My wife and I and a photographer friend of mine were guests of Annie Frayne, who were the security people. And when I went up to the ticket counter, they said, "Geez, we didn't know you were coming." And I said, "Well, I was told that I would have tickets." So they put me right in front of Bruce's microphone in the orchestra pit. There was only 3 of us there. And he came out and played Prove It All Night, the very first song. This was in 1978, and blew me away.
Awesome.
I almost jumped up on the stage and ran when he went off the stage, but Mary says, "Don't do that; they'll arrest you." So yeah, it was great. He's my hero.
What's your favorite Bruce song of all time?
Prove It All Night.
That's it. That's the favorite one. Just because the verse.
Well, it's the greatest. I think it's the greatest live video rock performance you can see. His guitar work is incredible, and just the passion that he shows. Plus, the band is so damn good. I mean, all those guys are just the top.
I love the Rising album. I know maybe some people don't, but the Further On Up the Road is my favorite song. I love that song. Yeah,
Okay.
Great album. Yeah, great album.
He should have got that a record for record of the year, and they gave it to the girl. I'm trying to think of her name. I got it, but his song was up for song of the year. God, I can't. I'll think of it at 2:00, John. I'll call you. But she was a girl, and she had this one quirky album that came out, and you don't hear too much. No. This was back in the Rising, which was what, 2001, 2002.
Yeah, I was gonna say okay. Okay, so she's definitely not around then.
God darn it! I'll think of her name too. Son of a gun. But maybe I'll email you her name when I do. I'll think of it at 2:00 in the morning. I guarantee you.
Yes. Are you seeing Bruce anytime soon?
Well, I'm hoping. His tickets are damn expensive, and this Terry McGovern, who was my buddy, I've probably been backstage 15 times to see Bruce and shared minutes with him and everything. But now that they had COVID, and now that Terry McGovern's gone, the only guy I know is his bodyguard, and his name's Gil Gamboa. And a nice guy. He runs a security firm in New York, but he's Bruce's #1 security guy. You'll see him every place that Bruce goes. And I saw him in Europe a couple times when he was just this past couple of weeks. But matter of fact, if you're going to watch CBS Late Show tonight, Bruce is going to be on from 2021.
Really?
Yeah, they're showing it. Yeah, so
very
you
cool.
still might have time.
Yeah,
10:15.
Yeah, I'll have time. Yeah. As far as you, it's like social media. Is there a place to find you out there?
Well, I got kicked off of Facebook because I got a little political. So, but that's okay. No, not really. I a lot of people go through my son, and it's Jim Brunzell, at Sound Unseen, and then he relays the message to me. So, matter of fact, I did a deal with this girl from England, and it was for Odyssey, and it's supposed to come out, and it was a long deal. She sent the lady here to hold the mic and everything, and her name was Isabel, and she had just done an interview with Harry and Meghan, and this was last year. And so I'm anxious. I told her, I said, please let me know, because it's funny because the last question she asked me, she said, Jim, if you could talk to Vince McMahon, what would you say? and I looked at her and I says, I'd ask him to repent for his sins. And she looked at me like, oh boy.
Bad question. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but
not out there. Twitter, or no?
Pardon?
On Twitter or no?
Not really. I get so much stuff that I just, I just don't have time. I don't want to get involved. And, I had a nice run on Facebook and everything, and I might do Facebook again, but, my son is helping me, and he might even help me with doing a little more things. This guy wants me to do a program for him out in LA, have my own program, but I can't commit to that right now. So, but I appreciate your time and your interest, and hopefully it went good.
Yes, great stuff. Thank you so much, Jumpin' Jim. Appreciate all the time.
Okay, John, I'll be in touch.